Our voting stations opened this weekend to allow eligible voters to register. It follows delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. For more on this, we're joined by the Independent Electoral Commission's Chief Electoral Officer, Mamabolo. Mr. Mamabolo, thank you so much for coming into studio. Firstly, it's the first time you're having to do voter registration under certain restrictions as a result of COVID-19. How are you finding the experience?
Well, I think the voters are responding well. They are complying with the public measures that have been announced to curb the transmission of the virus. We've seen them come along in their masks. They are complying with the need to use sanitizer. Some of them even brought their pens and so on. So overall, we are happy that there's been a good cooperation from the voters in terms of the measures that we have had to introduce within registration stations. Any
immediate challenges that you're observing that may have an impact on how you run the by-elections in November?
Certainly, it's the issue relating to the speed at which the process moves. This is the first time there are certain insights that we can take into the by-elections on the 11th of November. We've got to manage the speed at which we operate. Otherwise, people may feel that the process is too slow and we may lose crucial participation.
Does historically, so some of the studies that you conduct into running elections in general, does it show that the pace at which that queue moves ultimately has a bearing on whether or not somebody's actually going to show up for the election?
Certainly, on a big election day or during a general election, it does have a bearing. It does create some anxiety, especially in circumstances where shortages of ballot papers are alleged and so on. It creates an anxiety that we can do without.
So what does it mean then going into that voter registration weekend, going into that election weekend? I know it might be too early to tell, but does it mean that you're going to need to bring more people on board?
We'll have to use bigger facilities to the extent that they may be available. Temporary stations, we may need to increase the capacity of our tents. We may need to increase staff and so on. Those are the elements that we will look at and make decisions on a case-by-case basis.
How much of this becomes a test run for what you're going to have to do next year for the local government elections?
It's a welcome dry run because we've been inactive, as you said, for 6 months in terms of by-election. So this is a really needed dry run that we need as we prepare for next year. There are insights, as I say, that we will have to bring to bear in our training processes for next year.
What kind of role are political parties playing in assisting the IEC through this process?
Well, political parties are a key stakeholder. They assist with getting the messages out to the potential voters, their supporters. They are a good springboard in terms of consultation in the party liaison committees. And really, they have to mobilize the voters to come on the day.
Much of what is being done now, of course, will also be seen as a way, again, of pointing to the elections next year. With these by-elections that are being held, are you seeing an increase in the number of independent candidates who are running within these local districts and municipalities?
Not at the moment. Candidate nomination is yet to come. We will have same in the next few days, at which point we will know the extent to which independent candidates will be taking part. And then we can make projections, of course, about their participation even for the general elections. Having said that, though, the contest for political office is getting competitive. We've seen that in 2019. We expect that in general there'll be an increase in political contestants. Whether the independent candidates' interest in next year's election grow in the same proportion is something that stands to be seen.
So what does that do for you as the IEC when there is this contestation? Is there a fallout for you from that? Are you having to deal with more pressure in terms of your own processes? Is your work questioned more simply because of how competitive the environment is becoming?
Certainly. The more competitive the landscape is, the more pressure is brought to bear on the operations of the IEC. Firstly, there's an increase in the oversight over the work that we do. So we've got to sharpen our operational efficiencies. That's one. But you've got to deal with a greater number of people who have an uneven understanding of the electoral prescript. Because what we find is that the new entrants often come with a low base of understanding in terms of the electoral prescripts. Therefore, there's a need to upscale them quickly by the IEC to ensure that by the time election comes, they have a fair understanding of the electoral prescripts.
One of the cases that you've recently been dealing with is the one that relates to Herman Mashaba's Action SA party. Where are we with that? Because he seems to be contesting that the IEC has in fact not ruled fairly when it comes to his own party symbol and his choice of party name.
Well, they've requested certain information, which we will avail. They've indicated that they'll be launching an appeal with the Commission, and once the appeal is lodged within 30 days, members of the Commission will consider that and make appropriate decision.
Does it concern the IEC to have your intentions as an independent body questioned to the extent that Action SA has been doing ahead of important elections?
No, certainly not. This is a democracy. We've got certain responsibilities in law, and we must discharge those responsibilities without fear, favor, or prejudice. And that's what we have done in this case. And people remain aggrieved. And it's natural. People will remain aggrieved, and there are remedies that they can exercise if they feel aggrieved. And we welcome the fact that they'll be appealing. The Commission will look at the matter afresh, and an appropriate decision will then be made.
Is the criteria clear-cut? So the issues that you have raised about why this party cannot be registered, are those clear issues, or is it subjective to those that are sitting on a panel and having to make a final call?
No, they're quite clear that the effect of registering a party is to protect its name, its acronym, and its distinguishing mark or symbol, what we call the emblem. So once you bring in an application that is an affront to a distinguishing mark of a party that is already registered, we've got to act in a manner that protects that party. That South African law has been part of our statute since at least 1997, so it's not a new thing.
You've heard the comparisons between this matter and the AIC matter with the ANC, and you've had time to reflect on it. So what are the key differences between those two cases?
Look, we've done research on this matter ahead of last year's election, and out of that research process comes the fact that the distinguishing symbols, your emblems, are the primary identifier which voters use. Not so much the acronyms, not so much the name of the party leader or even the name of the party, but rather the distinguishing symbol or emblem. So when a person is given a ballot paper, the first thing that they look at and the basis upon which they make a decision to cast their vote is the distinguishing mark or symbol. So in this case, we felt that the proposed distinguishing mark resembled one of a party that was already registered, and in that case, we are constrained to register a party.
Is the fact that this research was not necessarily available, because you say it's 2019 research, if I heard you correctly?
That is correct.
So the fact that it wasn't available before, does that mean that the criteria you're using before is not quite the same that you're using now?
The criteria, it's a legal criteria. it's been part of our statutory scheme since at least 1997, and is the basis upon which parties have been registered into the party register. So it's always been there.
Okay. So what value does this research add then? Why is it necessary for you to bring up this research?
No, the research is important insofar as it tells us about voter behavior and to strengthen what the provisions of the law already provide. So that's what it does. It could have come up differently, and it may have necessitated amendments to the existing law, but it merely confirmed that which is already within our statute book.
How do you handle attacks on the credibility or even the independence of the IEC?
Look, it's unnecessary for political players to hurl insults at the IEC, to besmirch really the independence of the Electoral Commission, because that done sufficiently enough, it will impede the perceived and manifest independence of the institution. So our call really is for parties to desist from such practice. If anyone feels aggrieved, there are remedies available. And if anyone is aggrieved, we are available to meet to deal with the issues. But secondly, the IEC will respond by the manner in which it conducts its election. That's the best response we can offer, because the manner in which we conduct elections, with the efficiency that we need, the impartiality that we display at the voting station level will stand for itself.
When we look at some of the areas that you're going to be casting these elections in, the reality is that we've seen declining numbers of voters coming out to vote. How is the IEC intending on changing that?
Look, there's a phenomenon in our country where there's a relative decline in participation levels in national and provincial elections, and a maintenance of voter turnout in respect of municipal elections. So we don't see that decline in municipal elections. Of course, we've got to embrace new technologies. Our voter education drive, our communication drive will be anchored on social media, because that's how people receive news and interact and engage with one another these days. So we're going to use that more to try to turn the tide, so to speak.
All right.